Hello, everyone. I hope you are having a wonderful Tuesday. I am Melissa. I am an event host for Power to Fly. I'm in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the south of the continent. We are waiting for the spring to begin, but it hasn't yet, so I'm still wearing my sweaters. And today we are going to have a wonderful conversation. I'm really happy to host because I know we will all learn a lot from it. So since we have so much to talk about, I want to quickly go through some guidelines for our chat and learn today. So first of all, if you've joined one of these chat and learns before, you know that this is supposed to be a conversation. We really, really want you to participate. We want you to share your comments, your questions, anything you need to clarify. So please use our chat box to send your comments, questions, and everything you want to share. Also, feel free to turn on your camera if you want. It doesn't have to be Instagram perfect. We just want to see your smile, your face. But in case you do not want to do it, that's totally okay. Then keep in mind that this is being recorded. So that means you don't need to take down notes because you will receive an email 2 to 3 days from today with a link for you to be able to rewatch this entire conversation. You will also find it on our YouTube channel. So just relax, participate, and enjoy our conversation. Keep in mind that if you want to remain anonymous, you can send your comments choosing my name from the drop-down menu on the chat box so I can read them for you. And that being said, don't forget to follow Power to Fly on social media. You will find it as @Power2Fly. And that being said, we are gonna introduce Christie. I'm really happy to introduce her. Christie is an award-winning advisor. She's a speaker and the author of the book, Begin Boldly, How Women Can Reimagine Risk, Embrace Uncertainty, and Launch a Brilliant Career. She has 2 master's degrees with a focus on gender research from the University of Oxford. She's also a leading expert on how can we harness the power of intentional risk-taking to create more dynamic and vibrant careers and organizations. And Christie has been named by Thinkers 50 as one of the top management thinkers likely to shape the future of business. She currently serves on the Women's Leadership Board of the Women and Public Policy Program at Harvard Kennedy School. So I'm really glad to welcome you, Christie. Can you share with us what are we gonna talk about?
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and hello everyone on the line and anyone that's watching this afterwards. Today we're going to talk about a topic that causes a lot of anxiety, angst, and nerves, which is networking. But it's such an important topic because all of the research says that the power of your network is really correlated with your career success, and that it's even more critical for women. So the question isn't whether we need to network, we know we do. The question is how we face our fears and move through that anxiety to make those meaningful connections. And so today it's really going to be an open forum, no questions off limits. I'm here to answer questions and provide you with actionable tools and techniques on how you can harness certain research-driven tactics to build those meaningful connections.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that, Christie. So before we begin, these are our today's main takeaways. We've gathered all of your questions, all the questions you sent before the event, and we've gathered them in what we feel is a nice flow to keep things conversational. So we are gonna begin with our first question that says, how can networking impact our professional development? And In your case, Christie, how has it affected your professional journey?
So it's hard to put into words the impact of networking. And I simply want us to think about it as having connections. And human beings are naturally connected, desire connections in and outside of work. And I think when it comes down to it, it is the most essential thing in your career. And it can provide learning, growth, mentorship, sponsorship, advocacy, opportunities for you to lead others. That all happens through connectivity. And for me, it's been, I think, the number one thing that has defined my trajectory is being connected with people, and that allows you to be where the opportunities happen. So I do not think we can overstate the importance of connectivity.
That's wonderful. I think we should all have in mind the importance. Well, we will learn from that with this conversation, but I think we all know the importance of connectivity. I'm sure that everyone that joined us today have that in mind, but sometimes we find some difficulties. So I'm sure you will help us through them. So related to that, another question we receive is, which are some recommended conversation starters in social events that have already worked for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I do think one thing's important is that we each come with the own intersectionality of our identities, our own communication styles, our own preferences. So what I'm going to share may work for me, and you'll have to think about how to customize it for you. But what I wanted to share is that the number one best conversation starter is a question. And in my book, Begin Boldly, I say women often get so nervous about networking because we just over focus on what we want to say without focusing on something even more powerful, which is what we want to ask. And I also wanted to share that sometimes we err on the side of asking kind of canned traditional questions like, what's your job? And there's actually power in going deeper. But what I would say is the best conversation starters are questions about the individual you are talking to, rather than just talking about yourself. And if you can come into that conversation with a little bit of context, that's even better. So let's say you've done some research on my background and you say something like, Christie, I just heard you wrote a book. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your focus areas. Tell me a little bit more about how you came up with that topic. That automatically opens up the door for someone else to talk about themselves, but you've had that insight and that context coming into that conversation. And that is the most powerful conversation starter.
Yeah, and I can relate to that when someone talks with me and asks me things and knows about me. You know, everyone finds it easier to communicate because you are like on a common ground. Both people know what they are talking about.
Yep.
So I really like this next question because I think it's something that goes through our minds many times when we start asking questions. So what are some of the questions I could ask without being or looking like a meddler? I think the limit may be narrow sometimes.
I will tell you, I think sometimes we worry too much about perceptions rather than just worrying about what we want to ask. And so I do want to say that a lot of research has been put out there that there's a likability gap. And what we perceive someone else thinking about us or how likable we are is actually less so than we actually are. So some of these worries about being perceived in a certain way are overinflated, and we'd be better off not worrying so much about them. I think a really powerful way to think about what questions you want to ask is thinking of yourself like, what would I want to be asked? Like, take a step back and put yourselves in their shoes. And then also think about what you want to learn, what knowledge they can share. Maybe it's about their career trajectory. Maybe it's about what they love doing. Maybe it's about what challenges they're facing in their job, and is there any way you can support? But there's so many different questions that you could go in, and I think we should kind of put worries about how we're perceived a bit to the side, because question asking actually increases likability, increases perceptions of competence, helps women navigate the double bind. And actually, again, I think it's funny because we always worry, we always say we're not as likable as we actually are, and questions can help you with that.
So we should not overthink.
No.
I will keep that in mind. Do not overthink.
I say, so that's so true. And one thing I talk about a little bit in my book is women get stuck in analysis paralysis, which is they are paralyzed through analysis. And that actually works against us. We'd be better off saying, what questions am I going to experiment with in this conversation? And then at the end of the conversation, I'm going to say, did that feel good? How did people react? How was my conversation? Did I have an opportunity for a follow-up conversation? And what questions am I going to try next time? And I think what we think we need to do often is analyze, then act. But there's all of this great research, one by Herminia Ibarra, around the power of acting, then analyzing. So I'd encourage you all to pick some questions that feel great, go into the conversation, and as I say, try it and tweak it, try it and tweak it. There's no perfect formula, but I think analysis has its limits on the front end.
So Monique also shares her comment. She says, I am glad you mentioned this, as we tend to perceive how we will be viewed when it's not based in reality, as we haven't actually sent the email or sent the message yet to connect. So I think we can all relate with this sensation, overthinking, trying to do the exact perfect questions.
Yeah.
It's hard. So
yeah,
let's keep this in mind.
Women are prone to catastrophizing. So I talk about this a little bit in my book, where we think about like the worst case scenario, and that holds us back, and we overstate the worst case outcomes. So I'd encourage you to try to counteract that kind of cognitive tendency and think about what's the best that could happen. And even though that may seem like a simple mental switch, I think it's really important to encourage us to err on the side of action.
So don't overthink, stay positive. We're gonna go to our next question. Thank you for that wonderful answer, Christie. It was really inspiring. So our next question is, it also asks for some tips or strategies to help, that can help someone to have a fluid conversation with someone else.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, some of this, what I will say is some of this will sound simple, but it's not always easy to implement. So even though, we often say, the key to being healthy is getting outside every day and taking a walk and eating nourishing foods, that can still be hard, even though it sounds simple. And so even though these tactics may sound simple, which is great, the key is to keeping yourself accountable for implementing them. And so one thing, obviously, in conversation is that listening is an incredibly powerful tool, and reiterating what you've heard and clarifying. But there is great power in follow-up questions. And there was a study, I believe it was done by Allison Wood Brooks out of Harvard. And if you look up on HBR, I think the article that summarized it was The Power of Questions. And it talked about the power of follow-up questions in conversations. And her studies and a number of other ones looked at even people in speed dating scenarios and the chances of someone getting an invite back. And those that asked more follow-up questions had better connections. And that's kind of reducing a lot of research down to a very high level. But I would encourage you not to just stop with one question, but then when someone tells you something, say, tell me more. I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Can you give me an example? Could you explain? Oh, I'm interested in this. Oh, and another way you can do it is you can reiterate what you've heard, which is, oh, that's so interesting. I heard you say this. Now I'm wondering how that translates to this. So you're almost reiterating, level setting that you've heard what they're saying, and then you're building upon it. So I think that's incredibly powerful. The other thing I wanted to share about follow-up questions is I want you to think about each person as an iceberg. And what you see at the top is only 10%. And there's a lot of a person that exists below a waterline. So what you assume about me by just seeing me is probably very, very superficial comparison to what's underneath. But people make judgments just on what they see. So the key to getting beneath the waterline is asking questions. And I remember when I was facilitating this program at Harvard with Allison Woodbrooks, she said something funny. She was like, oh, have you ever heard about the 6 points of separation from Kevin Bacon or something, you know, the different networking games? And she said, it actually takes 6 questions to get to a point of relation with someone. And I'm paraphrasing what she said at the time, but I found it fascinating because there's something for women called affinity bias. And if you're in an all male environment, people may not naturally have an affinity for you because of what's just above the waterline. But if you engage in a dialogue where you're asking someone questions and they're asking you questions, you're more likely, once you get to that 6th question or so, to find that point of relation and commonality and affinity that wasn't at first obvious. And this is particularly important for those that are in underrepresented positions from a race and ethnicity background as well.
That was wonderful. So now we will go through some mistakes. People asked us, what are the mistakes you have seen people make in their scripts when they are networking?
Focusing too much on what they want to say and not what they want to ask. So you'll get the theme here by now. I really think that, yes, one part of my book focuses on being a courageous advocate for yourself and crafting and controlling your narrative and what that looks like, you know, describing who you are, the value you deliver, all of these aspects. But we often go in thinking we need to just blurt out some elevator pitch, and life doesn't work that way, and great connections aren't built that way. So again, I just want to encourage everyone on the line, as you're crafting your narrative about yourself and your story, spend as much time thinking about what you want to ask. So that is one mistake people make. The other mistake people make is, again, thinking about worst case scenarios and almost working themselves up so much before they go in. And one trick that I have for that is we often think, and this is a theme in my book as well, that I think it translates across negotiation, networking, all areas of your career. But one thing I say is that there's been so much focus today on being confident and not enough on being courageous. And if we wait to feel confident before we go to a networking event, we're likely never going to go. Or we're going to feel like we walk in a room and we're incapable because we're not confident. So realistically, you need to just say, I can be a courageous networker and connector, even in the absence of confidence. And just know that you can take courageous action when you feel afraid. And that's a really powerful mental switch in these situations.
Yeah, and I was thinking when I was listening to you that also keep in mind that you want to know about the other one when networking. It also releases some of the stress because it's not that you need to have all the answers.
Yeah.
What you're going to look for are answers from other people. So maybe that can also release some of the tension we have before, like I should know everything. How am I going to answer? No, you are asking.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the studies that I talk about in my book talk about question asking, increasing likability, persuasiveness, connectivity. But my work specifically with women has shown that focusing on what you want to ask instead of what you want to say helps decrease the nerves associated with networking, because it suddenly feels like the spotlight isn't as much on you, and it's not like this pressure cooker where you have to prepare everything. So that's why I think it's one of the most powerful tools. I say curiosity is one of the most powerful tools to form connectivity.
So please, let me remind the people that join us, please feel free to share your comments, your questions for Christie. I will be monitoring the chat box. So another question we received is, how can I approach professionals in a conference to ask for advice for my professional development?
You do just that. You go up to them and you ask for advice for your professional
that's
development. Not to oversimplify, but I recently posted something on this. It was actually because it was World Mental Health Day yesterday. And I posted this study that Adam Grant had shared a while back. And it was that people underestimate how likely people are to want to help them. And we always worry about being a burden. But in reality, people are much more likely to help us than we think. And also that can create value for them. So I'm just pulling up what I had posted because I said, I want people to flip the script from, I wonder how inconvenienced they may feel if I ask for help, to, I wonder how valued, trusted, and useful they may feel. Because we often talk ourselves out of getting help before we even make that ask. And we forget that asking for help and being vulnerable and building that connectivity and getting that support can create such value for others. And it doesn't mean you're going to get a hit with someone every single time. It doesn't mean every ask is going to be a yes, but that's no reason to stop asking. And and so this is what I just shared. I shared, don't underestimate the impact that asking for help can have on your relationships. It can build connectivity, shared value, and mutual trust. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember, is that we're not just a burden or an inconvenience, but we can actually make someone feel valued, trusted, and useful.
Yes, I think maybe we should lower the voices in our head, those negative thoughts, because everything you're telling us makes me think of that, how sometimes we are our enemies, our own enemies, thinking bad thoughts about ourselves and things that might get into the way of our goals. Someone else asked us, once we accomplish the goal of starting a conversation with someone, how can we keep in touch with them after the event?
Yeah, so I mean, a great rule of thumb is obviously following up and saying it was great connecting with you. And then depending on how much of a connection you had with them, you could say, like, I'd love to set up time for a follow-up conversation and get it on the calendar right then. Because even if it's 6 months from now, or I'd love to keep you posted the next time I'm in LA or the next time I'm in New York, and then follow up. And sometimes for me, I use that as an opportunity, and it's gotten easier now that travel's a little bit easier as well, to say, I'm in your city. I promised I'd connect when we connected last year, just seeing if you're around. And then there's a natural continuity in the conversation. And it is really good to say thank you and set up that time right after the connection point, because otherwise, if you let it pass, you're less likely to have that continuity. And that way they'll remember you in their inbox if it was like a conference or anything else. Another great way is if someone shared an interest. So if I met an amazing woman leader at a conference and I was dying to collaborate with her around creating a curriculum at a university on being bold for women entering their senior year or something along those lines, then let's say we're not at the point of discussing that relationship yet and we're just getting to know each other, but we have a shared interest. The great thing to do is like share articles every time. Hey, I just saw this article, was thinking of you. These insights are really interesting. And I remember earlier on in my career at Deloitte, I was so passionate about diversity and inclusion. And one of my career sponsors that was so formative in my life, a partner at Deloitte, also had that interest. And I would send her articles all the time. And I didn't do this intentionally at the time, but I just wanted to read this, share it with someone else that liked it. But I would send a link and a quick summary for her and say, and this relates to our last discussion on women at Deloitte. And doing stuff like that, particularly for senior leaders, can be such a powerful connection point. How can you generate value for them? I'd also encourage you to think about something that I do with my career coaching clients, which is picture a Venn diagram. And in one area is what you're good at, what you're the go-to person for, what you excel at. what you're known for. And the other is what you're passionate about. And if you don't know what you're passionate about, just think about like what you lose all sense of time when you're doing, what you're energized by, what excites you. So just answer kind of the what gives you joy, give those questions. And then the bottom is what the market or a leader or an organization needs. Now, there's a lot of things I enjoy that I'm not that great at. And there's some things I'm good at, but I don't really enjoy. But when I find the intersection of those two, that's really powerful. And when I find the intersection of that and what a leader needs or an organization needs or the market is demanding, that is my career sweet spot. So in conversations, you might reflect afterwards, what's the intersection of this leader's needs, what I'm good at, and what I enjoy, and how can I deliver value to them? And that sometimes that process of thinking through that can really focus for you on what you can give, not just what you can get. And sometimes networking makes us feel dirty and icky because we're focused on what we can get. But once you focus on what you can give, it also will help you feel less nervous.
That's something great you point that out, because I think many people feel that way. Like when they are trying to network, they feel uncomfortable feeling that they only get things, receive things from others. So
Yes.
I think it's great that we all keep in mind that it's a connection. So both of the parts should give. And of course,
Yes.
all of us have something to give.
Yeah, exactly. And there was this study done that said that women compare networking more to going to the dentist and men compare it more to a fun game. So we already know, to your point, we have more points of internal resistance in general to that, to feeling icky, dirty, self-serving, you know? And so to get around that, focusing on what we're going to give is a really good tactic that will generate value for others, but also help us get more meaning out of those connections.
Definitely. Let me remind people in the audience, you can continue participating, send us your questions, your comments. And while we wait for that, I have another question here, which is, how can we look relaxed when talking to people and hide our anxiety?
Yeah, it can
Or,
be.
I mean, sorry, maybe do you suggest being honest about how we feel, or how should we manage through those hard situations?
So there's certain tactics that you can use to address your anxiety beforehand. And so one tip I have is like, don't think, oh, I shouldn't be anxious. Just be like, this is a feeling, and it's okay and natural to feel that way, but I have the tools and tactics to network in the face of anxiety. So that's really important. Don't shame yourself for being anxious. Just say, I have the tools and tactics. So here are some tools and tactics. One is, a lot of people say, stay calm. You know, just stay calm. And their internal dialogues like, just stay calm, stay calm. Research shows that does not work, because moving from anxiety to calm, and I'm not going to be able to talk about all the science about behind this, but if you search on YouTube, again, Alison Wood Brooks has some great stuff around this. But moving from being anxious when you're in that fight or flight mode to being calm is a jump that is near impossible to do. And so instead, we can trick our brain by saying, I'm excited. I'm excited. Because the fight or flight response and kind of the energy and nerves that come from both anxiety and excitement are very similar. And so studies have shown that you're going to be more effective at working through your anxiety and networking effectively if, instead of saying to yourself, stay calm, stay calm, stay calm, you say, I'm excited to connect with people. I'm excited to go in. And it sounds crazy because you're telling yourself something that you may not be initially thinking, but I'm telling you it works. Because even for me, before I get up on stage, if I'm feeling nervous, I cannot tell myself to get calm. But if I tell myself, I am so excited to talk to all these women, I'm so excited for the potential for impact I have on these individuals, I'm so excited to be at this space in my career where I can spread a message and put more tools in the hands of women. Suddenly for me, that energy is there. So that is one trick. I encourage you to look it up. It's explained a lot better online than I just did, but there's a lot of research behind it. The other trick I want to tell you is that we often try to quiet or silence our inner critic. So if I hear someone, let's say my inner critic, why should they listen to you? What if your book doesn't do well? You're still early in your career. Do you have the credibility to do, like, whatever it may say? Oh, your hair today, your outfit, anything that a woman may think. Then what happens is, if we tell it to silence it, it doesn't work. So there's other studies around this. And instead, you need to talk back to it and have a phrase you say back to it. So I realized silencing my inner critic does not work. My inner critic is always going to be there. So instead I recognize it and talk back to it. So some people even name their inner critic. There's studies around that. That does not work for me because it feels a little cheesy, but if it works for you, knock yourself out. But I do have a phrase. So my phrase is, I hear you, but I got this. And so for so long, even when I was writing my book and in the doom and gloom of book writing period, and I was questioning so much, going through edits where people pull things apart and come back together, my passcode for my computer was like, I got this, to remind myself every single day I logged in. And so I just ran a program with women in high school, and they all came up with their own phrases. And for some of them, it was like, I hear you, but I'm made for bigger things than my head's telling me. I hear you, but I have these dreams. And so you'd be amazed when you have your inner critic come up with what you're going to say back to it. And then the last thing for me is Amy Cuddy's power poses. Again, it's funny, I'm behind stage and I'm putting my arms out and I'm like doing things like this. But I will tell you, if you go into the bathroom and just try to take up space rather than all of us that do this, it makes a big difference. So just in summary, like, really focus on thinking, instead of stay calm, stay calm, stay calm, think about I'm excited. Look that up. Great little videos on it. Don't silence your inner critic. It doesn't work. Come up with a powerful thing you can say back to it. And remember to take up space. And you'd be amazed at how that can impact kind of feelings of angst and nerves.
Oh, those were powerful tips and advice. We have many comments and questions. So Gigi shares, my child has always said, I'm nervous excited. It's the combination of nervous energy and being excited. So I think that sounds great. T says that yes, reframing is really powerful. And Fiona asks, what is the sensitive topic of disclose for disabilities? How to ask for accommodations and what are the options? Any suggestions?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that this would be in a workplace context, and hopefully I'm answering this correctly. I think, the good thing is that there's increasing awareness around disabilities of all shapes and sizes, and the fact that some are visible and some are invisible. And I think one of the most powerful things you can do is, again, go in and ask a question. And I recently ran a session for a Fortune 100 financial services company in London, and it was just a week and a half ago. And we were talking about making asks in our career, and this could fall into making an ask for accommodation. And we often get nervous and we think we have to come in and say, well, this is my performance, this is my value, this is all the points we need to say, guns blazing, and then this is what I need. And that actually can backfire on women for a whole host of different reasons. And a powerful way to do something instead, and this tool is in my book, there's a list of questions in the Courageous Asks chapter. If you reference that, is to go in and say something like, this is my situation, this is what I'm grappling with. I really wanted to put this out on the table transparently. I wanted to know what you would do if you were in my position, or what type of accommodations you believe would be reasonable if you were in my position. And so one reason that's such a powerful question, or what advice would you have for me on how to navigate the current area, is these questions build empathy. They make the person have to put themselves in your shoes. There have been studies showing how persuasive that is. So that's a really powerful way to do that. The other way, another really great tool is the power of options. So people often won't say, if you say, I need 10 extra hours per week or private space to do this or this accommodation, someone might say, feel like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? But if you thought about a range of ways that, and it depends honestly what your disability is. So if this doesn't apply to you, try the earlier option I just said. But sometimes, let's say you're grappling with something, there might be different ways you could work. And one could be like, I'd like to work from home 2 days a week. The other may be, I'd like split days or flexi working. The other might be, I need a heads down space in the office without interruptions. And you could almost come up with 3 or 4 different options that may work, and then say to the person you're talking to, would any of these work? Are there any other things you think might be helpful? And options in conversation and having persuasion are so persuasive. And I was giving this example the other day where, when I say to my son, who's 5 years old, like if you just say you have to eat your broccoli, he's not going to want his broccoli. But if you say you can have broccoli or lettuce, he's going to choose the broccoli most likely. And just remember the power of options in conversation. So those are the things that I would recommend in that situation.
Thank you. In case you need to ask something else, please feel free to do it. Renee shared the following question. With my company moving to work from home, there are fewer opportunities to connect to new people organically. What are some tips to reach out to someone I have never met, but I want to connect with at my organization?
Yeah, great question. So many different ways to do that. I think one is think about like what events or meetings or things they might be in where you could have access to them. And so sometimes we think we need to just do that cold call for that one-on-one, but let's say you're trying to connect with an executive that's involved in a sustainability initiative, and your manager is dialing into that call. You could even say, I was wondering if I could join that call today. I'm really interested in X. And, obviously be authentic, but then you could always follow up from that shared experience and say, I really appreciated your comments on the call today. I'd like to learn more. And you've got that automatic point of connectivity through that. You could also ask for introductions from people, and that's really powerful. So use the power of your network and the connectivity and really get them to advocate for you. So let's say you said, Monique, I really wanted to connect you with Cindy. I think you guys will have a lot to talk about. There's a number of shared interests. You're both really passionate about X, Y, and Z. I'll leave it for you to take it from here, but someone that'll kind of present the shared aspect and go from there. The other aspect is sometimes just go for it. I mean, if there's no connection, no shared meetings, what do you have to lose? And the best thing you could do is find some kind of context or something to reach out to someone. Either that you read their article or you heard them speak somewhere, or their career path is something that's aligned to yours, or, so use something there and always think about how you can generate value for them as well.
Okay, so we received another question. It says, how can people who are unsure about their personal story and history due to circumstances of life experience gain more confidence when talking about themselves while networking?
Yeah, so first of all, I really think it's the diversity of our experiences that brings vibrancy to the workplace and makes teams so much more dynamic and makes our experiences as human beings so much more interesting and rich. And so I know it's not easy to say, don't cover aspects of yourself or don't worry about it. I know that is very, very hard when we all have different aspects of our history. We're all like fabrics or tapestry is made of different strings, and you don't necessarily want to, expose all of those in a professional context to begin with. But I would say just have faith in the differentiated value that you bring. and really think through, and this is something, again, in the book, the chapter's called Courageous Advocacy for You. And there's a template where you can think about who you are, which is really what you want people to remember about you. And then what you do. And that's not your job title. That's not going up and saying, I'm an analyst for Goldman Sachs. It's what's your function? It is that you manage this, or you help executives with this, or you're focused on events, and this is that. And then another bit is like, what value do you drive? And so really, I want you to think about preparing about what value do you drive for those around you? What are your unique differentiators? And really come in with that sense of like, there's something super unique and powerful about you and your narrative and your story. And bringing that to the table is so important. The one thing I will share in terms of an exercise was, I believe it's out of the University of Michigan, but there's this exercise called your reflected best self. And I love this particularly for women, because often we understate our capabilities and skills. We know this. And so looking at ourselves through the lens of others is really powerful. And there was a chapter in my book around this. I actually took it out in the end because there was too much content, but it was based on this. And it was about going out and having discovery discussions with 5 to 10 people that are close to you in your life. And it could be family, it could be professional. And in the best self exercise, you say, when am I at my best? And they give you anecdotes. In the way that I've done it in the past, it's everything from asking what your unique special edge is, what are your critical differentiators, how have you used them? And then I've gotten students on the back end or professionals to create their best self portrait. And it has been the most emotional exercise I have ever done with people, seeing the images, the stories, and people will write poems, people will write songs, people do, but stepping away. One young woman did a picture of a mask and she was taking it off and she said, I'm not ready to abandon all these thoughts about myself, but these are the things I was thinking, and then this is what everyone told me here. And one did a butterfly, and one side was dark and black and white, described herself, and the other side was colorful and showed all of the themes. And this may seem like something you would do in school versus in your professional, but when was the last time we truly allowed ourselves to see ourselves through the lens of others? So look up that exercise. It's the reflected best self exercise. And I really think that for women that are struggling with our own sense of self and confidence, it's very, very powerful.
Yeah, and also when we have those challenges of negative thoughts and the ways we tend to see ourselves when we are low on self-esteem, sometimes using others as mirrors is better than actually look at yourself in the mirror if you're feeling down or sad or anxious, right?
Yes. Exactly. And it's so funny to me that in today's world where we know women are more likely to understate their capabilities and skills, that we still use self-assessments as like the best way to like assess ourselves. And I was like, if self-assessment's the main tool, then the gender divide between men who overstate their, capabilities and skills and women that don't will consistently be exacerbated. So for me, I think there needs to be other methods of assessment and getting to know ourselves. And I think this is a really good one.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. What I never thought about what you said about self-assessment and how women tend to look at themselves compared to men. So it's wonderful to have that in mind. I can say this as a woman, as someone that works in a language that it's not its native language. So many times I feel unsure about what I'm doing. So I will keep all this in mind.
Well, you're doing great. I just have to tell you, to say you feel unsure and then be able to facilitate discussions like this in front of so many people live, that is the living example of courage. So congrats.
Thank you very much. But you know what? I got to learn a lot through this chat and learns, because I'm sure everyone knows in the audience how hard it is sometimes for us women feeling nervous, anxious to do these kind of things. But I've learned so much from many women like you that I'm having a wonderful time. I'm gonna continue with the questions. Let's stop talking about myself. But this one is related to what I just said. So it says, what advice would you give to non-native speakers when speaking at a multicultural event? And how can we overcome the language barrier that is causing us to feel insecure and anxious?
Gosh, I'll give you a couple ideas, but I mean, if anyone's on the line that where English is their second language, I'd love to hear from you as well on the tactics you use. I mean, I think this could be a really big knowledge sharing platform, whether you do it now or in the future. But any tips I think would be great, and you could just enter them in the chat. But I will say that I think transparency is the best thing. So people, I think, are aware when someone, if you are struggling, if I'm speaking too quickly and you're struggling to grapple with certain things, I think it's fine to be like, you know what, I really want to get what you're saying. Do you mind slowing down just a little bit? I just want to make sure I'm catching it all. Or saying, well, Christy, you use this word, conflation. What does that, you know, English is my second language. Can you explain that to me more? And thoughtful listening and asking those questions, again, goes back to the theme we've been talking about. It shows you're engaged. It shows you want to know more. And even when English is your first language, you still sometimes struggle to understand people, their thoughts, what they mean by a sentence, everything else. Now, the amount of questions I may ask around those comprehension may be less, but they're still showing that I'm engaged. And I would say that level of engagement and thoughtfulness and critical thinking is something that will set you apart. So I just wouldn't be afraid of sharing that and of trying to get the essence of what they're saying, because people will appreciate that ultimately.
Please remember to share your tactics if someone from the audience has English as a second language. Fiona says, I would join more meetup to talk to peers to practice the language.
Great idea.
That's her tip. I don't know if anyone else has something to share. While we wait for that, I have another question here. What do you do when there is a long silence after a little bit of conversation? How can you combat that awkwardness that people begin to feel?
I think I wouldn't worry too much. It's so funny when there's a bit of a silence. I think that's natural in conversation. So first of all, don't freak out. That's how conversations go. But I would have in your pocket, you know, follow-up questions you can ask and different aspects or whatever it may be. So like, just remember that you can control the toolkit that you come into conversations with. And if you prepare some questions that you can ask, then the conversation will flow more naturally. The silences come when no one has any more questions usually, but you can keep a conversation going for a long time by asking someone questions.
Yeah, and also I was thinking with the advice you gave at the beginning, is that sometimes, we shouldn't let our thoughts take us away from the conversation, right? Like you're talking there and you begin thinking, what am I gonna ask next? Oh, what if this person stops speaking? What should I do? And I think that thing might distract you from talking to the person you have in front.
Yeah, just try to talk to your inner critic. Just say, I hear you, but I got this. Because what's the worst that could happen? There's a silence. I mean, that's not a horrible worst case scenario. And again, as I mentioned, we're more likely to underestimate how likable we are. So I think we overthink these things a lot, and it's okay. It's also okay to transition to another conversation, to bring someone else into a conversation. to think about where you're going to go next or who you're going to connect with, to say, it was great chatting with you. I'd love to stay in touch. Do you have a card? I mean, there's no reason you can't, move on after you've exhausted your questions and conversation.
So Mary also comments on Fiona's tactics. She said, she says, I was scared to join meetups, but I did. And it had been a great decision to join interest and professional groups. I met so many new and amazing people. So I think we have a tactic that works.
Yeah, do it. So I do have to tell you one thing that you have to interrupt is this self-fulfilling cycle of limiting beliefs. And so if you say to yourself, I'm not a good English speaker and therefore I'm not going to be a good networker, right? That's your limiting belief. And then you avoid networking events because you believe that belief. And then finally you have to go to one because we're all forced to at some point. And then you fumble over your words, there's awkward silences, you don't know, you feel anxious, and then you say, I told you so, I knew I was bad at English and networking. Then it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. It's the same thing. Imagine if you said, I'm not good at running, then you don't practice running, then you're forced to run a race, then you don't run well because you weren't practicing, and then you reinforce that belief because of proof. So you need to interrupt that self-fulfilling prophecy, and that advice that was just given of going and doing it will actually show you examples of when you can do it, and of the fact that you can go out there and hone and practice. One other thing I wanted to share with you is there's this little tricky thing in our brain called confirmation bias. And if we say, I'm not good at networking, we're going to think about every single example that ever existed of times where we didn't network well. And we're going to forget about the times where we did make meaningful connections, where we did have great conversations, where we did find a mentor or a friend or a colleague or whatever it may be. So whenever you get in this all or nothing thinking and you think, I'm not good at this, these are the examples to showcase that, try to look at the cracks in your own argument, because confirmation bias means we're more likely to see that negative than anything that counters those beliefs.
So we received another question, which is, lack of self-confidence has held me back many times, and I have not been able to network. Taking the first step is the most difficult thing for me. How do I overcome that self-doubt? You've shared some advice on this, but maybe if you want to build on this question.
Yeah, I mean, one is going back to that thing, reminding yourself you don't have to feel confident and just be courageous. Be courageous even in the face of self-doubt, in the face of fear. And you don't have to be fearless. You can feel fear and still make progress, right? I heard someone speak the other day, and they said something like, fear is always with you. But just make sure it's not in the driver's seat. It's just like in the passenger seat. And that's true. Like you can feel fear and still be able to network really effectively. But there's ways to ease into it. So imagine going to an event with someone and you both going together so that you can feel more comfortable. What about connecting with people on a passion? It's easier for you to go to an event where you have a shared interest or background. Maybe it's a event for people that used to go to your university, or people that are from your country, or people with a shared extracurricular activity, where you can start on a smaller scale, hone those skills, those conversational skills, and then move them into a professional capacity. So those are kind of some easier ways that you can kind of ease yourself into this.
Okay, so Fiona also says that she found out that joining a coaching bootcamp is also very helpful. So we are having some other tactics. Mary shared, be courageous in the face of self-doubt and fear. That's a powerful statement. I agree. Of course, I agree. And okay, so we have some minutes left. I'm gonna ask you another question we received before the event. It relates to what we spoke. I think you already answered this, but maybe if you wanna say something else or also remind us the tips and tricks, because I think we all have this problem, which is what we do with ruminating thoughts. The person that sent this states that it's someone that overthinks everything too much during a conversation. That always works against them, and sometimes they don't have the tools to silence their head. So if you want to remind us what you already said, but also say something else, please do.
Yeah, just remember that don't get stuck in analysis paralysis, and remember that thinking has its limits, and erring on the side of action, like, ultimately remember you're going to be more likable than you think you are. And if you ask questions, you're going to be even more likable, and even more connectivity will be felt. So just use those tools and keep those kind of fears to the background, and know that you have the right tools and techniques to address some of the fears that you have and you're thinking about. And ultimately, the thing you need to think about most to be great at networking is really how you're going to ask those meaningful questions. And I would put, if you're going to overthink anything, start thinking about that versus those fears in your head.
Last, is there anything we didn't ask you and you would like to talk about, or you would like us to ask you about?
Yeah, I was just looking up because I was just drafting an article that's going to come out in a couple weeks for publication. And it was focused on one important thing that we haven't touched upon yet fully, which is moving from small talk to deep talk. And one thing is that our natural inclination, like when we go into conversations, is to ask, and I mentioned this earlier, like, what do you do? Where are you from? But there's this research that builds a compelling case to ask deeper questions in conversation, and that deeper, more intimate conversations are connected with like happiness. And they did a number of studies on this. So I'm just going to tell you, so I just pulled it up on my phone. In a dozen experiments with roughly 1,800 people, from business executives to visitors in public parks, the researchers found that participants felt happier and more connected than they expected after relatively deep conversations with people they had just met. And so they don't want you to put all caution to the wind, but they do say people are more likely to be interested in talking about their passions and their interests than what's up. And so I just wanted to share some ways you can reframe this. So we have a few tactical questions. Like, instead of saying, what do? You could ask something like, how do you deliver value to others through your work? What problems do you help others solve? Instead of asking people, what is your current role? You could ask them something, and I do this all the time. I always want to know the person behind the bio. So like, what is something about you that's largely unknown, something that isn't in your bio or CV? What is something about you that others may find surprising? And that's such a fun conversation. Instead of saying, how is work going? You could ask, like, what aspects of your work do you most enjoy and why? What do you least enjoy and why? What gives you the most meaning and satisfaction and joy at work? What energizes and excites you? What's the most daring thing you've done at work? And instead of how are you, you could say, what's top of mind for you right now? Or is there any kind of support you need right now? What was the highlight of your week? What's been going well? So this is also in the book. It's got like a list of questions. And that's one thing I should mention to everyone on this call. It's written like a toolkit. I didn't write a book to write a book. I wrote it to give you the tools, action-based, to go out there and do it. And like, these are the questions you can ask. But like I said, everyone's going to be different, but asking questions is such a powerful tool. And I wanted to just mention that those deeper questions can make such much richer conversations and better connectivity in the long run.
Thank you very, very much, Christie. I think we had a wonderful conversation. I know that everyone agrees in the audience. I also want to thank everyone that joined us via Zoom, via YouTube channel, via Power to Fly's website. So have a wonderful Tuesday, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you, Christie, again.
Thank you so much. It was great being with you.